Hello, and welcome to our next data governance-centric webinar. We're happy to have you join us today. As a quick housekeeping note, if you have questions during the webinar, please use the question pane in your viewing window. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Also in your viewing pane, you'll see the attachments section. We've placed a copy of the slides there for you to take with you at the end of the day. Now to get started, first let me say thank you for joining us. Hear how Worldpay had turned some early false starts into a successful data governance program. As for your speakers today, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Thomas Brenson. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our Data Quality and Governance portfolio here at Informatica. Now, I'm joined today by the real star of the show, Chris Eldridge. Chris will be sharing his story and walking you through how their company went through one of the biggest points of change in their organizational history and came out the other side, a data governance program that they can really rely on. Not only a program, but also trusting in their data. And why is that important? Well, last year a study came out from the Harvard Business Review that found that a mere 3% of organizational data is up to basic data quality standards. That's a rather shocking statistic if you think about it. Basically, it's saying that we can't trust the data. And if you can't trust your data, how can you build things around that data like accurate analytics? Or what if you're trying to improve your customer's experience and you rely on that customer data? Or what if you need to comply with something as serious as GDPR? Of course, being a data governance webinar, we know what the answer is, don't we? We need to have data that is governed. Now, if you're just starting out, or better yet, if you started out but maybe had some hurdles, I'd really encourage you to check out our data governance program workbook. This is a new piece of content that we published just about 2 months ago, and I've put it over in that section that we mentioned before, so make sure you download that here before you leave. In the workbook, we've put some helpful tips and exercises that your teams can go through to start working on perfecting your program. You'll learn about critical topics like securing budget, building your team, or importantly, how to work with stakeholders. Going through the exercises, you'll start to form out one of the key components here, which is a DAISY, and that's driver, approver, contributor, and informed. Those individuals live within your governance community, and you can find them throughout your organization, which, let's face it, isn't something nice and clean like a round table like we have here. It's something a little crazy like a spider web of individuals who know things about your company like policies and procedures, where to find data and how to report on it. That's right, the understanding is already in your team. It's knowledge that you need to build out and in order to really scale your program. But to do that, it needs to be connected. You need to discover your data, link it together, and make it accessible. Democratize it so your teams can do what they do best and make sure that it's also repeatable. Because if it's not consumable and it's not reusable, how can you scale? Often that leads to hurdles. Some of you have been through this. You've had many early momentum points, maybe with a single project, but you never really got that program that you were dreaming about or where you wanted to take it. You still have unreliable data, reports that you can't count on, and questions from senior managers in your organization. So what if you tried to reach that summit and there were just too many changes occurring that kept you from reaching the peak? That's what we're here to talk about today. Chris Eldridge is the head of at Worldpay. The organization used to be called Vantiv, and they went through a massive merger. Chris is going to explain how those hurdles during that period of tremendous change have really helped his team to regroup and reformulate what success looks like. Now, without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Chris to tell his story. So, Chris, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate that introduction. So, hello everyone. My name is Chris Eldridge. I run data governance at Worldpay for the team that was focused on the Heritage Vantiv company. And for those of you that are not familiar with Worldpay or Vantiv, both Worldpay and Vantiv are credit card processing companies that merged earlier this year, forming the #1 global merchant acquiring company. So that's what we do. We can pretty much process credit cards in most of the known world. So I will move on to talk about our approach. So the first question that most people ask, both inside our company as well as outside, is, why data governance? I've heard a lot about this topic, but I'm not really sure how I should leverage it, why I need it. In our case, there was a significant amount of change that drove what was happening in the company, both around data transformations, which tend to be a very hot topic for a lot of companies, as well as acquisitions. We are an active acquirer of companies, growing company, and so each of these two items really drive a lot of confusion, questions, concerns, and needs, not just around data, but around the governance of that data. And so that's why we're focused, as Thomas mentioned, the Worldpay Vantiv merger was a very large catalyst. We also had a very large data transformation program that we were participating from the beginning that really helped us get some traction in the organization. So as we went along these journeys, a couple of things came up. The first of being, we happen to have the luxury of being the fourth go-round of data governance at Heritage Vantiv, now Worldpay. And before I could really get started, the chief technology officer at the time challenged me and he said, "Hey Chris, what can you do differently this time around? What are data-driven companies that are successful doing that's different so that we can make sure that this time around we are successful and not disbanding the team and moving them into other roles?" So I did some extensive research, talking to vendors like Informatica as well as consultants and people that work at data-driven companies. And what I learned was that the current successful practice is really around data democracy or context. So as I looked at the old ways we tried to do this, and a lot of you probably have had similar stories where you focus on participation, data governance councils, getting everyone in the room. We had tried that, and it didn't really work because we could never really convince people to agree. They might agree in principle, but then a week or two later, they were already back to the same old disputes. So we changed our approach to be context-driven. What that meant was that we wanted to focus on the ownership of the data assets. We wanted to focus on the definition or business glossary related to those assets, and we wanted to focus on usage so that at least if people did not agree, we could at least get them the context so they could understand if I've got a term, let's just say, how do I count a customer? We can tie it to a use case and a definition. So if it's different than, say, the sales department's definition, we can then at least provide that visibility and clarity of how that should be used and who's using it. So the next is around stewardship. We had tried federated model in the past. And federated model, where we really went out to the business and said, hey, anybody that's really a data analyst, data consumer, or working on reporting, maybe you can help us be a data steward. What we found was that caused us to have people who now got an extra part to their job that they were trying to do in their spare time, and they turned over a lot. So we changed that up, and we went to a centralized, dedicated team for data stewardship. The next was scope, right? The challenge a lot of the earlier initiatives had were around trying to get people to agree on things that they had disagreed over for years. Obviously, just because we show up as the data governance crew doesn't mean that we can all of a sudden have the right answer. In fact, there may never be an answer. So what we said was, let's not worry about history. The business moves so fast and the pace of change is so fast that people are needing new data assets and transform data assets every day. So let's go forward. Let's focus on taking the principles and the approaches, and let's put them from the beginning of the onset of new data assets so that we can include them in the process. So as we're thinking about requirements, thinking about designs, we can also include how are we going to put this into the glossary, who's going to own this, who's going to decide when we need changes, who's going to approve those changes. So that's what we did there around scope as we go forward. And lastly, around data quality. We really had thought of data quality at this company as very department specific. If finance thought their data was good, then it was good. If sales didn't like their data, then it had bad data quality. But we never took a holistic approach to say, let's do a foundational view of the data quality and report that out. So we created a dedicated organization, same organization, in this case data governance, in order to really measure and manage that data quality. So how did we do it? Well, we established these 4 pillars. We said anything that's going to be governed has to have an owner. It has to have definitions that are published, and lineage is part of that. It has to have a data quality aspect to it. We need to determine, do we need to measure new data quality, or can we associate data quality? And the last piece is around change management. How do we handle incidents and changes related to that data, right? What's that process going to look like? If we meet these criteria, that's what we call data governance. So from a stewardship perspective, one of the things we wanted to do, especially around identifying ownership, is to really put those data stewards as a dedicated discipline. Their job is really to connect the organization as it relates to these data assets and to put together a stakeholder map of who are all the right owners in respect to this data. So those owners would be things like data domain owners, functional data owners, source system owners. We know who to contact no matter what issue comes up or what question comes up. So data domains themselves could have a variety of stakeholders. And so that's why we wanted to put this glue together. And the last thing is they're focused on data quality and change management. So it's one thing to go ahead and catalog or define data and what's in the data asset today, but the business is going to change, requests are going to come in, and that's going to very quickly potentially get out of sync. Also, day in, day out, the quality can vary depending on what happens at the point of transaction. And so we want to make sure that somebody's taking a look at that and taking ownership of how do I manage the data quality? How do I manage, requests that come in? This is really important because we want to make sure that we also calibrate these data stewards across the different areas. So when we used the federated model in the past, we found that you'd have very different opinion of what a data steward did depending on where they worked. This way we can make sure that we have consistent approach and process for every area from a data stewardship angle. The next piece is, as I mentioned, govern forward. So it's really hard when you go into this process to try and solve all those problems that people have had in the past. What we've said is we've changed the game a little bit and said governed isn't everybody agrees. Governed means that it meets the criteria. And so if we do that, if it's got an owner, if it's defined, it has data quality, and if it's got the appropriate information set up for the change management pieces, then we can include that in our metadata or business glossary portal. And so what we find is that that's going to be the place where people can trust the information, where they can get information about these details. And one of the drivers of why we feel this is the right approach, because as we think about people coming to us, registering their assets in our portal, and we're going to go back to them and say, we're happy to put it in our business glossary and in our portal, but you have to meet these criteria. That way, they can be sure that they have the right information. And then our data stewards will go ahead and maintain that content. But we want to do it always on a go-forward basis, and then once it becomes a data asset that's under our governance, we will continue to update that. In terms of how do we do this, we have a number of technology pieces that help us to make this happen. So from a data quality perspective, we use Informatica Data Quality. For the business glossary and lineage, as well as how we report out data quality, we're using Axon. That's the business-facing view of that data quality. And then the searchable portal that I mentioned would be Informatica Axon. We have invested in the Enterprise Data Catalog. We're in the process of getting that implementation underway, and we plan to use that to do metadata automation, to update our lineage components, as well as to augment more of the technical view that people can get to from Axon, as well as data tagging for topics such as GDPR-style PII tagging, confidential, restricted, other types of data that we're looking to call out. We have big data management, mainly because the majority of our data repositories are in a big data environment. And so we wanted to leverage big data quality to really get the performance improvements that come from running large data sets against the data quality rules. So that's our component stack, if you will. And then how we're going to go forward with this is we are first and foremost in the process of introducing our business glossary. So we released first components of our business glossary and data quality reporting for a governed asset. Our next move is to really go ahead and set up that incident and change management for data quality. So we've got an interim support process today that we're going to move into a more enterprise official support capacity. We have then the next piece of automating the creation of data incidents. So if we see with data quality that there's a problem, maybe we have some billing, a large percentage of billing that's missing, say, customer IDs, that would be a bad thing. And so we would want to not wait for the business to see that and say, hey, maybe there's a problem here, let me call the help desk. We would want to actually actively start working on those data quality issues. And so the steward that's responsible for that area would be empowered to go ahead and start raising those tickets and working with those stakeholders from their stakeholder map in order to start getting the process of identification and remediation underway. And then finally, we're looking to establish data quality management as a sustaining function in the organization. Today, as we have built out the organization, and from a go-forward perspective in terms of the data assets, we're doing it based on data asset by data asset, but we want to expand that to create a more foundational approach to how we actually think about data quality as an organization.
Oh, that's perfect, Chris. Thank you so much for that. I know I really appreciate all the insight and all the background really on how you've structured your program. Just real quick, I want to remind everyone that over in that attachment section, again, we have the slides from today, but we also put a link out to that workbook that I had mentioned earlier about forming your governance program. So hopefully you'll pick those up. Now, Chris, while you were talking, there were a number of questions that came in. I'm hopeful that maybe we can knock a few of those out here and get your answers on them. Would that be all right?
Absolutely. So why don't I start?
Yep,
the first question that I see is, can you provide some more information about the data governance organization structure? And absolutely, be happy to. So we have recently introduced a Chief Data Office here at Worldpay, and my organization reports up into that Chief Data Office focused on data governance. And my organization has a real focus on centralized data stewardship. I also have roles on my team focused on creation of data quality rules, as well as I have a few folks on my team that are more focused on process and how we roll out templates related to the data governance deliverables.
All right, perfect. Yeah, and I think that sort of answers one of the other questions, unless you want to expand on it a little more. There's a question around, is your team more federated or more central? Do they, mainly report to you? You want to dive in a little bit on the team members?
Yeah. So as mentioned, we have a centralized stewardship model, and as part of that, we identify the relevant data consumers and business analysts across the organization. So that's the touch point on the data delivery and consumption side. But we try to centralize that, and they're basically calibrated based on and organized based on function. So I've got somebody who's really more focused on customer and sales type data. I've got somebody focused more on billing type data, somebody focused more on settlement and authorization type data. So it's just a matter of making sure I've got the right business-facing stewards that can truly understand the data issues and communicate that both to the technical side and the business side.
That's perfect. All right, let's see. We got a number of others. Let's talk a little bit, kind of go back to the beginning. We were talking a lot about the change that your organization went through. So how did you regroup and get the budget to go in this new direction?
Excellent question. We were lucky enough to have a large data transformation program that we were attached to. And as part of that, we made the case early on, as part of that program, that data governance was a very critical component to the success of that data transformation. That was, mentioned, a very large program. What's interesting is that throughout the program, we initially had a small role as a track on that program, but as people started to understand more and more about the challenges and issues that we were working through, we actually extended our organization to really focus across the enterprise to help the data transformation program make sure they have the right foundational data. And so we split it into two parts. We split it into, still had a track on that data transformation program with dedicated resources, but we also expanded out into a more enterprise-focused group with the intent to really drive that consensus and governance across the organization. The funding from that was program specific, but it's turning into, we have a lot more interactions with other initiatives, other touch points, such as upcoming GDPR. And so we're really trying to leverage that for the cases.
Excellent. I'm not sure if you saw the question that came in while you were talking there about the types of data stewards that you have. Are they more business? Are they more technical? Do you have both?
Excellent. So that's another good question. And in fact, we have a combination today. We kind of split the data stewards in two types of functions or roles. Some of them are more technical in nature, related to data mapping, doing some more of the detailed SQL, data quality rule creation, et cetera. And then we have more business-facing data steward roles in which they are focused on really the change management aspect, working with the business to understand the issues and requirements, as well as to make sure that the relevant data assets are fit for purpose.
And I really like this other follow-up question. We haven't kind of gone into the technical pieces yet. We've talked a lot about the program and the structure and the people that you have in place, but one of the slides that you had up there had about the technical features that you had. And since we're talking about technical data stewards here for a second, this seems like a good transition into this one question. How do the big data pieces come into play within your governance program?
Yeah, so and that's actually tied to another question that came in as well, which is, is there an enterprise data model? So the big data is our data lake, which we use for really staging a lot of the analytical information that's going to be parsed out. We have domains that then get moved into data marts, which ultimately turn into reports. And so we're focused on making sure that that base layer of harmonized data is governed correctly, and then we branch out to start talking about the downstream data assets. In that environment, because it is a Hadoop environment, we wanted to have as much performance gain as we can by leveraging the right tools. And so we are focused on leveraging IDQ, for example, for data quality, but we also want to harness the power of Hadoop in that, which is why we have BDQ.
Perfect. I know you've mentioned GDPR a few times here, then kind of upcoming plans and things that you're working on. We just had a question come in about if you're addressing GDPR. Do you want to just lightly cover your GDPR thinking?
Yeah, so it's definitely a critical topic for data governance, and it's something that I'm working with a number of folks across the company today to determine, how we need to tackle that, right? So we're definitely thinking that that's a big component of our go-forward approach.
Oh, perfect. And since we're kind of talking go forward, this seems like there's kind of two about the future scale questions here. What do your plans look like? And will you have to keep adding new people on the team in order to kind of keep up with it?
Yeah, so that's a timely question. Something we're looking into as we're building out the approach to governance data assets. We're trying to leverage the technology, such as Axon, to help us to add scale to what a data steward can achieve. And so we're in fact trying to come up with some models right now around how we assess those drivers of resource needs to support these things as we go forward. Right? So we have, with any data environment, we have known today what's in our scope and what's in the program scope that we want to tackle going forward. But there's also, the constant change. And so we're trying to keep that in mind as we think through how do we leverage the right tools and processes to enable as much scale as possible.
That's great. And let's end on one last one here, Chris. And I thought this was a really good question and sort of is the kind of purpose of the webinar here. And any advice to offer someone that's really struggling to keep their program alive?
Yeah. So data governance is tough. Everybody talks about it, and everybody thinks they need it, but most folks have a different opinion about what it might be. So it's really hard to keep it very targeted, but that's what you really have to do to keep it going, is keep it targeted, keep it connected to the needs of the business, and to help folks understand that when you roll out data assets, no matter what they may be, without the right governance, they're going to quickly become out of date, stale, or something that you don't recognize because change happens. And so we really have to make sure that every initiative, every project that comes down the pike that's going to touch data has a touch point to data governance. So we can actually, in some ways, qualify, if not quantify, exactly what that impact looks like. And so we try to plug into the overall portfolio of projects to keep that relevant.
That's excellent. Well, Chris, I want to thank you very much for taking all of these questions here today, and as well as sharing your story here with us. And to all of you listening, thank you for taking half an hour out of your day here to spend with us and learn about the Worldpay story. We very much appreciate your time, and Chris, thank you again for being on this and joining us. Until next time, everyone, thank you very much. Have a good day.